What is going on, guys? Welcome back to my Lightroom tutorial series. This is video number 5, and in today's video I am going to be talking about a few different filters and tools that Lightroom has to help you take your photo editing to the next level. So in my previous video we talked about all of the panels and edits that you can do in the develop module, but I didn't cover this row of tools that's up here at the very top underneath the histogram. And that's because I wanted to dedicate a specific video to using these tools. Now, these tools are used to add selective edits to your photo. And by selective edits, I mean you can selectively use these tools to affect different parts of the photo to enhance or maybe minimize certain aspects of the photo. And so we are just going to go through these one by one here, and I will show you how to use each one of these photos. So today we are going to be using this lovely black and white image of this. I'm not sure if it's a tanker or if it's some kind of Coast Guard ship, but I took this photo in Port Angeles, Washington when I was there last year. And I thought it would be a great image to display and show you how to use these editing tools that you can find up here in Photoshop. So really quickly, let's just dive into this here. The first tool I'm going to talk about is the crop overlay tool. And I'm going to click on this here. And the crop overlay tool is a tool that you can use to either crop in on your photo or create different aspect ratios for your photo. I'm going to reset this here. As you can see, I already had a crop applied to this photo. So this is the original aspect ratio that I had when I edited or when I shot this photo. And as you can see, it's a 3x2 image, which is pretty standard on most modern DSLRs, that you can get from Canon or Nikon, anything that's a full frame or a crop sensor camera like my 7D Mark II is. And what's great about the crop tool is that not only can you crop in your photo like this, but you can also use it to maybe say your photo is a little off center, or you weren't, like for example, I shot this photo handheld and I wasn't completely level since I shot it handheld. You can use the photo, or you can use the crop overlay tool to adjust the leveling of your photo. So for example, I'm just going to reset this here really quick. My horizon line looks pretty straight and narrow, but as I look at the ship, and it's probably just how it was sitting in the water line, or in the water I should say, but the ship just looks a little crooked, not centered. So I'm just going to really quickly adjust the tilt of the crop tool, and that's looking a lot better. Take this back just a little bit. And what's really great is you have all these lines that you can use, all these up vertical and horizontal lines that you can use to kind of help guide you when you are using the crop. So that's looking a lot better, more horizontal, and the horizon line looks pretty straight as well, and the tanker's looking straight. So that's really good right there. And then, as I was saying, you can use the crop overlay tool to create different aspect ratios. So if we go over here to where this little lock icon is, and I will get to that in just a second here. So right here you have this drop down where it says original, and it says original because it is keeping the original ratio that I shot the photo in. Again, that was a 3x2 ratio. And if you hit this drop down, it gives you a bunch of different options to customize and give your photo different aspect ratios. So for example, say I wanted a square crop on this, I can click 1:1, and now I have a 1:1 aspect ratio of this tanker. Another option here is to do a 4:5. This is pretty popular for uploading to Instagram, the 4:5 aspect ratio, or maybe if you want to print it out, 8:10, because you can get 8:10 paper. You can drop down here and you have some old school aspect ratios, I should say. Being 4:3, this is a very common aspect ratio. I'm going to do a quick reset here to give you the full size so you can see what the actual 4:3 might look like. Something to keep in mind when you're adjusting the aspect ratios. If you keep going aspect ratio by aspect ratio, it will change based off of the previous one. So as you saw there, when I was changing my aspect ratios, it kept narrowing the photo down. So let's go a 4:3 crop here, and as you can see, this is a 4:3 square. Think old television sets before 16:9 widescreen became the predominant in-house viewing aspect ratio. Speaking of which, we can go to a 16:9 ratio here as well. And then there's another one that's 16:10, makes it a little tighter, not quite as long. And then I have a custom ratio to create a 4:2, which makes it sort of look like a panorama. So I actually like that, and for the purposes of this tutorial, I am going to use the 4:2 aspect ratio here. And really quickly, I'm just going to make sure that the tinker is leveled out. That looks good. And so that looks pretty good right there. Let me talk about this lock icon really quickly. So as you can see right here, I have it locked. And I have it locked. That way I can maintain whatever resizing I do, I can maintain that aspect ratio. If I were to unlock it, and as you can see, unlock, think of your gym locker that you used to have in high school, or if you go to a gym, whatever. If I unlock that, now I can go to whatever corner or section of the crop that I want, and I can stretch it out, and I'm not constrained to the aspect ratio that I had previously. And as you can see here, I'm widening out, and I'm stretching it out a little bit. And that can be very useful if you want to have complete cropping control over your photo. I maintain the lock. That way I can stay within that aspect ratio that I set, because I do print out my photos, and it helps me just keep everything within that size of paper that I am printing out to. One other thing I want to cover in this tool really quickly is this aspect tool. If you click on this, you can use it to freehand draw your crop, whatever you want it to be. So that's really helpful if you already know what you kind of want the photo to look like. You can draw out that crop. So now that we've got our photo cropped, let's go into the next tool over here, which is the spot removal tool. This tool is just as it sounds. It allows you to go into the photo, and any aspect of the photo that you don't like or that you find distracting, you can remove it. So for example, over here, we've got this little bit of cloud over here. And if we wanted to remove this cloud, we can simply click and then draw over the section of cloud, and then Lightroom will calculate what it can use to remove that. And as you can see, it pulled from these pixels here and overlaid them over that cloud, and now we have a clean segment right here and no clouds. A warning about this tool: it is not 100% accurate. There have been instances where I have used this tool and it has not made an accurate selection about where it can draw its pixels to replace the section of the photo that you want to be drawn over. Photoshop is a much more reliable tool for that, because it is a more intuitive program in that its AI can have a better understanding of the pixels that are around it. But for simple removals such as these clouds, it's doing a pretty decent job. So I am going to just click done. And one other thing I want to show you guys with this tool before we move on is there are a few things you can do to affect how the tool is used in Lightroom. You can affect the size, the feathering, and the opacity of the tool. So for example here, let's say I wanted to make this radius of this circle here larger. I can simply come over here to size and drag it out until it's much bigger, or go reverse and go small, 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 very small, imperceptibly small. If you zoomed into the photo, you can use these smaller brush sizes to hit pinpoint details on the photo, and it will look larger since you have zoomed into the photo. You can also affect the feathering of the tool. And what this does is it tells Lightroom, okay, be gentler with anything that is outside of the main circle and feather it in, and just be lighter with your brushing. That's very useful if you have some detail that you're trying to work with, or you're trying to do some blending. Opacity, I'm sure everybody's heard that word before, is how much is revealed underneath what you've brushed. If you have it at 100% opacity, that means nothing will be revealed. If you have it much lighter, let's say something like 40%, and let's just click on this one so I can show you guys as an example here. If I click on that, which I've already affected and cloned out, if I drop the opacity, you can see that the cloud is starting to come back in. Now, if you're simply cloning things out, I would say just leave it at 100% opacity. But there are instances, if you want to just maybe be a little bit gentler with your cloning, that you can drop the opacity. There is also the heal, which acts very similar to the clone tool, but in the sense that it isn't strictly replacing the pixels that it is cloning over. Instead, it is trying to heal it by using nearby pixels to make an adjustment. So for example, I'll draw over this section of cloud here. It is still going to pull from the other pixels outside of the area and try to replace what is there. Where the heal tool would come in handy is if, say, you're doing some retouching of a person's face. You could help with a pimple or anything of that nature. For the purposes of this tutorial, I am not going to use this section right here. I want to keep this section of cloud because it looks pretty good in the photo. So that is just a down and dirty really quick of the clone tool. Now, there is the red eye correctness tool, and since I shoot landscape and wildlife, I really don't use this tool at all. If you were doing portraiture or family photos, this would come in handy. If you did get a red eye from your flash, this tool would be useful to replace that. And as you can see, it has two buttons, and this is a pretty new update. One for red eye, which is obviously people's eyes, and then you have it where you can affect animal eyes as well. The AI in Lightroom just keeps getting better and better and better. Now, the gradient tool is used to draw a gradient over your photo, and from there, within that gradient, you can make adjustments to that section of the photo. As you can see here in this photo, I've already got a couple of gradients drawn in affecting different aspects of the photo. So I'm just going to come down here to this toggle, and I'm going to toggle them on and off. So with them toggled off, you can see I had a much brighter sky, much brighter water when I shot this photo, especially since I shot it around midday, just a little past noon. And I really wanted to bring that sky and water down to give a little bit more emphasis around the ship and to just darken down these aspects that I really wasn't too worried about. So just to give you guys an example here, I am going to delete these gradients that I already have drawn in here just so I can show you guys how this works. And we'll start with a fresh gradient here. As you can see, I've got my exposure drop down. That's just to use as a benchmark. And I'm going to start down here at the bottom, and I am going to draw up. And as you can see, as I draw up, that water is getting darker. And once that gradient is in there, you can move it around, you can angle it, you can make it shorter or much longer and encompass more of the photo. And it's a really great tool to help control brightness and darkness in your photo in certain areas. Say if you have a really bright sky and a dark foreground, you can draw a gradient over the sky to bring it down, to bring the brightness down, I should say, and you can draw another gradient over the foreground to make the foreground brighter. So I am just going to really quickly affect this gradient here. I'm going to bring it down and bring it right there. And then one thing I should say about gradient tools, the more you extend it out, the more gradual the effect is. I'm just going to pump down the darkness here just to give you an example. So as I move the center up and down, you can see we have a much more gradual transition from dark to light. Now, if I bring this down and make it a much harder edge gradient, you can see we have a much harder transition from darkness to light. And this is pretty much replicating what a gradient filter for your camera would do if you buy those glass gradient filters that you can get from different companies. And it's the exact same concept. I prefer to do it in Lightroom because I have much finer control and I'm not worried about accidentally screwing up the filter out in the field and doing something in my photo that I can't reverse or fix in editing. And once you have that filter in place, you can make more adjustments. You can increase your contrast, you can increase or decrease shadow detail, you can increase or decrease your blacks. Again, I'm just going overboard here just to show you guys what it can do. And you can also affect things like texture and clarity locally to this filter, and you know, it gives you much tighter and finer control. Again, not quite what you would get in, say, Photoshop, but still a very useful tool. And then down here in range masking, this is something that was recently introduced into Lightroom. This gives you the ability to control what parts of the image the filter is affecting through color and luminance. Since this is a black and white photo, color is not going to work because it's black and white. But say you want to affect only the reds or the oranges or blues of a certain photo, you can select color, and then you could affect the mask based on that color selection. But we are going to drop down to luminance, and I find luminance to be a much better way to affect your photo, or to affect your filter, I should say. And so we are going to click on luminance mask, and what that does is it shows you this red area, and that shows you what sections of the photo the mask is affecting. I'll drag this up here just to show you guys a little bit more of it. And then down here you have the range, and this tells Lightroom what range of the luminance in the filter, or the photo I should say, that you want to affect. So up here at the right we have the light part, or the highlights, and down here on the left we have your blacks and or shadows. So by making changes here, we can tell Lightroom, hey, I only want you to affect the darker areas of the filter as you drag the lights part down here to the left, and vice versa. You can control how much black area you want to have affected. So if we click off the luminance mask, we can see here that the filter is only affecting within this range. So it's only affecting the values within this range of the filter. So that's a very useful tool right there. It has made using filters much easier in Photoshop, because it used to be you didn't have as much fine control over that as you do now. So a great addition to Lightroom in the past few updates that they've done. Now up here you can also grab a brush tool, and where this comes into play is, say you didn't want this section of water affected by the filter. You can grab the brush tool, and then you can select mask overlay down here, this little check mark down here in the bottom, and if you hit Alt, you get a subtraction brush, and I'll go over subtraction in addition when I get to the brush tool. But you can then, as you can see here, I don't want the mask to affect these hills out here. There's a little bit of red touching that, and I maybe don't want it to affect the ship. So by holding Alt, I can then brush over the sections of the photo that I don't want the mask to affect. And as you can see, the red is going away, which means the mask will not, or I should say the filter will not affect that portion of the photo. And let's just draw over the ship here as an example, because hey, I don't want it to affect the ship. As you can see, the red is starting to dissipate, and depending on what your flow is set to, and I'll show you guys that here in just a second, it may take more or less brush strokes to get rid of the effects of the filter. And as I was saying down here with flow is the amount of adjustment that is affected to the photo. So for example, I have it set on 100% flow here. Let's just randomly paint a part that, say, I maybe want to dark down. With flow set to 100%, as you can see really quickly, we've added the aspects that we want from the filter to this dark section right here. And we did that very quickly because it was set to 100% flow. I'm just going to option undo this really quick to remove that brush stroke. And let's just show you, say I had the filter or the flow set to 20%. That will allow me to very gently brush in the effects that I want. As you can see here, the red is coming through, but it's coming through very softly, not that harsh red brush stroke that we had earlier. And remember, it's a red brush stroke because we have this mask overlay selected down here at the bottom. So this is really great if, say, you only want to brush in just a little bit of the effect, you don't want to go overboard. This is a very nice way to finely control how much, I should say, that you want added to the filter. So that is a very quick rundown of the gradient filter there. Again, guys, I would tell you to just play around and get to know these filters, because that is the best way I have found to learn, is to just play around with things. You know, I'm a tactile, visual learner. I learn best when I get to get my hands on stuff and watch it as it happens. So I am just going to delete this filter here, and we are going to move on to the Radial Filter. Now our next tool here is the Radial Filter tool. This tool allows you to draw a circular or oblong radial around a section of your photo, and then from there you can affect different aspects of the photo either within, or if I click this invert button here, from without the circle. So let's start by talking about what the radial tool will do if you have invert deselected. And just really quickly, invert simply means that when you first start using the tool, if you have just started using Lightroom, if you go to use a radial filter and you draw it, invert will usually be unchecked. It should be unchecked, I should say. And what that means is that the adjustments you make will affect whatever is outside of the radius of the filter. So if I deselect, show, select, mask overlay here really quickly, I'll show you guys what I mean. So right now we are affecting anything that is outside of this circle. So I'm just going to grab my exposure here and I am just going to drag it down. And as you can see, we are affecting everything that is outside of the circle. Now, if I click invert, give it a second here, now you can see it is affecting anything that is on the inside of the circle. Now, a great way to use the radial filter if you have the invert checked off is to create sort of a vignette. Similar to how I showed in my previous video when you could create vignette with the effects tab, but this is a way to kind of be more creative and maybe have a little finer control over the vignette. If you use the effects tab to create the vignette, you're kind of sort of stuck with what Lightroom puts in there. Doing it this way, you have a lot more control of where you want the vignette to affect. For the majority of the time whenever I use a radial tool, I am usually wanting to affect whatever is on the inside. So in this instance, I've clicked invert, and now all of my adjustment there, that exposure adjustment, has gone to the inside of the circle. So just for demonstration's sake, if I drag the exposure down, you can see, wow, everything has gotten way darker on the inside of the ship there. And where this can really come into play is if you want to affect a certain aspect of the image. Say, for example, this ship. I'm going to delete this radial tool or radial filter for the moment, and I'm going to show you one that I have already drawn over this ship. So with my mask overlay shown here, as you guys can see over here on the right, these are the adjustments that I have made to the ship to bring out certain aspects of it. I increased the exposure just a little bit because if I turn the filter off, you can see the ship was a little bit dark for my tastes. It was not showing certain aspects of the ship that I wanted to see. So turning that back on, I increased exposure just a tad, brought my highlights down. That way I could bring down this really bright area that you can see up here with the mast and the bridge section right here. I pulled my shadows up a lot because I wanted to see all the detail of this section of the ship here. And then I really didn't do much else to this. While I'm thinking about it, I'm just going to increase the texture just a hair, maybe bring out some of those finer details of the ship, maybe punch in just a tad bit of clarity. Yeah, that's looking a little too much. There we go. That's looking really good right there. And then as you can see down here, I have affected, if I turn on my luminance mask, I have affected where I want those aspects of the filter to hit. And really, I just wanted it to hit in the darker areas of the ship. So anything that was in black, these darker areas, you can see it spilled a little bit over here into the power lines and the hills on the backside here. So just like with the grad filter tool, I can grab a brush and hit Alt, and I can brush away that section of the filter because I don't want it affecting that part of the photo. And I hit a little bit of the ship right here, but it was feathered very, very nicely, so I'm not really too worried about what it would do right there. So now, as you can see, I've refined that mask just a little bit more, and that looks pretty good. I'm going to turn off my mask overlay here so I can see what I'm doing. So there you go. That is a great way to use a radial filter, and how I usually use radial filters is to affect a certain section of the photo, whether that be, as you can see here, this ship or maybe a tree or any aspect of the photo that you want to draw more attention to. So that is the Radial Filter tool. Now I'm going to go to this last tool over here, which is the brush tool. And that is basically exactly what it sounds. It is a tool that will allow you to brush an effect over whatever part of the photo that you want. Let's say I wanted to darken this water down. Now, granted, like I showed you guys earlier, I would probably actually use a grad filter here, but let's say I just wanted to freehand it. I'm going to bring my exposure down here, and I'm going to give myself a nice large brush, and I've got a nice large feather, and you can increase or decrease the size of the brush either over here with the slider, or if you use the wheel of your mouse, you can increase or decrease depending on which way you roll the wheel. So I'm just going to give myself a nice big brush here, and I am just going to start drawing in, or painting in, I should say, that adjustment that I want to make. And I have a 20% flow, so I have a nice, simple, slow adjustment being made. And as you can see here, if I turn on Show Mask Overlay, I have a nice, easy adjustment being made to the water here. And that essentially is what you can do with the brush tool. Now, once you have your brush section done, you can affect different sections up here. If I wanted to increase the contrast, let's say I wanted to add a little bit more white to give it a little bit more punch there in the highlights, pull my blacks down. That is how you can use the brush tool to affect certain areas of the photo. Let's say, for example, here I wanted to really bring down, I can show you guys right here because I've already done it. This section of the mast here, or up by the bridge of the ship, it was really overblown. So what I can do is just simply brush a little bit right here, and I can pull down the exposure even more. As you can see, I was a little bit sloppy. I didn't really see where I was painting in there, but just for demonstration's sake, as I adjust right there, it becomes a little less noticeable. And then again, you can use range masking to affect what sections of the photo you want the tool to affect. So for example, let's just say I hit that dark spot a little bit too much. I can pull the dark up here, and now it will only affect that brighter section of the bridge. So that is how you use the brush tool. So there you go, guys. That is how you use these tools up here to make finer selections and adjustments to your photo. I hope you guys found this tutorial useful. If you did, make sure you hit that thumbs up button. Subscribe. I've got a few more tutorial videos coming out after this one, so stay tuned for that. And until next time, guys, I will see you in the next video.